Okay, let's talk about access modifiers. So far in our bank account class, you don't see anything with public or private or protected in front of our methods or variables. So we should always have our properties as restricted as possible and only make them visible to the outside world when necessary. So that's kind of a best practice. So for example, if we want, or let's just talk about the different access modifiers that there are. So let's come here. So we have, well, so far I've had everything be no modifier, right? So let's talk about methods first. So methods, we generally would want to say these are public. So public means it's available anywhere in the project, right? Anywhere in the project. The default modifier is anywhere within the package, right? Anywhere within the package. And then we have, let's add another method called private show activity. And we'll say here sys out showing recent activity. Okay, this is void. Okay, private is then only available within the class. So kind of go from most restrictive to the least restrictive. We have private, we have default, we have what's called protected, which is not as common, but it's the same as default except also through inheritance. And then we have public. So for example, if we make this show activity private, we come over to our bank account app and we're going to try and do acc1 dot show activity. It's not going to be available to us because we're not in that class anymore. So even though we have an object, we can't access that method. And so that's part of, we're getting close to encapsulation, but we need to first talk about access modifiers. So we want to make things public when we want them available for the client, right? So in this case, this bank account app is the client. We want to make sure that the client can access what they need, but only what they need and nothing more. So generally we have public methods. Where's my bank account app? There we go. We have public methods, and then we have, go up here. We'll get to encapsulation in a little bit because these should actually be private. So just to get things started, let's actually move this to being private. Okay, so in other words, this variable belongs to the class, it can't be changed, and it's only accessed within the private field, or within the class, I should say. So for example, let's say show activity. Let's say after each deposit, let's kind of fill this in a little bit. Let's make sure we're taking a double amount, and then we say balance equals balance plus amount, and then when we withdraw, we're going to take the same thing, double withdraw, and then we're going to say balance equals balance plus amount. There we go. Okay, and then let's say show activity. Let's say this takes a string activity. Okay, and then for every time, in other words, every time we make a deposit, we're going to call show activity. We're going to say deposit. Okay. Similarly, when we withdraw, we're going to say show activity, and we're going to say withdraw. That was the activity. Okay, so every time we deposit and withdraw, we're going to call this show activity method, and this activity method we're going to say your recent transaction, and we're going to print the activity, and we're also going to print sys out your new balance is, and then concatenate balance. Okay, so in other words, every time we withdraw money or deposit money, that's going to go into the account and it's going to update and it's going to print to us it's going to call another function that's going to print certain activity. So let's go with, let me comment all this stuff out so we don't get kind of lost in what's being printed. Okay, so I'm going to say acc1 dot deposit. We'll just say we'll make a few deposits, and then we're going to make one withdraw of 2,000. Okay, so after each time I call this method, we will call that show activity transaction, show activity balance. And this is helpful because we don't want, we want that to print automatically, and then again it's not available, so let's come back to bank account. So this is private. If it's private, it can only be called from within the class. Okay, so this is like a again automatic function that's going to just get called from other methods. Basically, the only way it's going to be called is if it gets called from another method within that class. So that's private. That's how we can use private. Similarly, we can also say something like your recent transaction, your new balance. So let's say toString account number. Let's also then print. Let's concatenate. Let's see here. So I want to say name, and then I want to say account number, and then after that I want to say routing number, and then concatenate. I want to concatenate routing number and concatenate balance. There we go. Okay, so now also if I call this acc1, well, I'll just uncomment what I had earlier. There we go. But again, so there's our routing number. But again, the routing number now, because it's private, doesn't even show up here either. So that routing number is private. We can use it. It's used in the program, and we are using it without even knowing it, because we as the developers implemented it in the background, but we're not exposing it to the client. So that's the beauty of using private. So we'll talk about how we can actually interact with private elements using encapsulation. But first we want to see the intuition and the difference between the access modifiers, public, private, and default. Again, mostly you'll be using public and private. Protected, developers use a lot more. It's use it more with inheritance. Obviously, that's the difference between that and that default. So always make your methods and your variables as restrictive as possible, and only expose them when you need to. So we want to enhance this bank account app to make it more and more lifelike. And so again, we made this routing number private static final. It can't be changed. It belongs to the class, not a particular instance, and it's private. It's not accessible. It's only accessible when we use it in another method, which we have done here. Okay, so that's a little bit more with object-oriented programming. We're going to keep on going ahead.